Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Dark Pixel Podcast. My name is Mike.
I'm Kason.
And we're live again. We do this live now. It's kind of cool.
I think that's just how it is now. I think that somehow we just subconsciously decided
we became a live podcast, and that's just the way it is now.
You're cool with it.
In any case, we're going to talk a little bit today about Terra Battle 2. Context on this for those who don't know. Terra Battle 2 was developed by Mistwalker, which is Hironobu Sakaguchi's game studio.
And he is the creator of Final Fantasy.
Yes. The creator of Final Fantasy does not work for Square anymore. I don't know if you do that. No. I'm sure everybody knew that.
Not for about 15 years.
He works at Mistwalker. Mistwalker made Lost Odyssey on the Xbox 360. They made The Last Story on the Wii. Those were kind of the last. Well, they made also Blue Dragon. So those were some console games that they made. But they have been out of console game development for a while. And they did some forays into mobile game development. Terra Battle and Terra Battle 2 are two of the most recent ones. So, in any case, Terra Battle 2.
You're trying to not say
shutting down. It came out recently. Hold on, let me see when it came out. Terra Battle 2, I think, was either this year or the very end of last year. Okay, so it was September 2017. So it's going to be shutting down. Yeah, it's going to be shutting down on September 3rd of this year, which means it won't even make it to a full year, and it's going to be completely closed off.
Wow. The original Terra Battle lasted 4 years at least, maybe 5.
Because you could still download it.
And it was pretty. It got millions of downloads. It was pretty successful.
Yeah. So I have an article here that we'll switch over to. We'll take a look at this. We have a quote from Hironobu Sakaguchi talking about why they're doing it. Oh, this is not the right one. This is the right one. Here it is. Okay, so his statement is, "Dear our North American Terra Battle 2 players." By the way, this is being shut down in North America only. It's not
just America. Okay, of course.
It is with heavy heart we announce that in the coming months we will be ending support for the North American version of Terra Battle 2. Service for the game will end on Tuesday, September 3rd, 2018, and in-app purchases will be removed from the game immediately. We regret having to announce this news to all of you who have passionately supported us since before the game's release. Withdrawing support for Terra Battle 2 is not something we do lightly. The game will always be precious to myself, Fujisaka, who is the artist, and the entire Mistwalker team. As we know it is to our fans. Oh, hold on, I think I read that wrong. Anyways, we are very thankful for the amazing community that has grown alongside our games, and we will continue to work hard to grow alongside you in our future endeavors. From our Reddit community to the Discords and the hardworking Wiki team to various Facebook and other social groups, we cannot express how much your support means to us. Sadly, Terra Battle 2 was met with unexpected struggles, making it challenging for our team to maintain a sustainable and enjoyable experience. We will continue developing games, reflecting on our experience from this game to bring new experiences to fans around the world. The Mistwalker team and I are hard at work brainstorming future projects with all of the knowledge that Terra Battle 2 has granted us. We hope for the world of Terra to live on, but the format, timing, and methods are all still unknown to us at this time. Thank you for your understanding, for being our fans. So,
what does this mean for Mistwalker? Like,
that's a very good question. Very good question, because
he moneymaker.
He says there, we would like it to continue, but the format and all this is unknown. So, I mean, the whole point of getting into mobile development, I think, and away from console development, is the issue of cost, right? Like, you don't have to spend as much money in development for something on mobile. So, I would think they'd probably stick to mobile development. That seems to be where they're at right now. I don't see a failure of a mobile title like this translating into, let's go back into a more expensive console development now. I mean, as much as we would all love that,
I know
that's not going to happen.
Like, when they started going into phone games, I was like, all right, they're not making console games anymore. And now that phone games aren't even working, it's like, geez, I don't know what the next step is for Mistwalker. They'll probably make another phone game, but it needs to be less, what's the word? Needs to be less resource intensive. They need to have it needs to be operable with a smaller team. I don't think Terra Battle was quite that. So I think
I wonder what the size of their team is. I'm not
whatever
sure
it is. I guess it needs to be smaller.
It needs to be smaller than what it is in order to be sustainable.
I can't imagine it's a big company, but
yeah. Dude McGuy here says,
really
this is why I don't like games as a service. When the sales drive up, boom, the games are dead. Could be a great game, but can't become a cult classic when the main focus is on generating recurring revenue.
Yeah, it's true. It's true, and then you can never go back and play it again, basically. It's gone.
I don't know why they couldn't go the digital, like, Steam route. It's just like, make a game that you release maybe just primarily on Steam to begin with, and it's like the success of that.
Well, that may be their new model. I mean,
it's not expensive to buy a license, especially in comparison to where he's been before. To get a license to put something up on Steam, they don't have Steam Greenlight anymore. They have a new program.
Yeah,
but with his name and clout, I'm sure.
Yeah, Hironobu Sakaguchi would get greenlit. Like, that's not even
wouldn't be a freaking problem. So I don't know, man. It is unfortunate, but I mean, I downloaded Terra Battle and Terra Battle 2 on my phone just because of him and Mistwalker, and but I don't play them. I don't play them. I started trying to get into the first one, but it's just like, dude, this isn't the kind of game I want to play. Like, Terra Battle 2 is a little bit different, and I was watching some videos on that, and it's like in principle, it's not that much different from, say, something like Final Fantasy Tactics, but there's just something about its presentation that just doesn't get me.
It's on a
excited.
Phone.
Yeah, it's just it doesn't.
That's a huge obstacle. Absolutely, just the fact that you're playing on a phone is like, I don't know, and it's your phone. There's so much else you have to worry about with like battery life or like just there's other apps that are just like right there. You could kind of open if you're bored for 2 seconds.
Yeah, and he's got millions and millions of people who would be interested in whatever it is he wanted to make. But I just don't think. The fans from the past, carrying over, are necessarily interested in mobile titles in the vast majority. So I think in order to keep development costs still low, rather than like off the bat saying we're going to release something new coming to the PlayStation 4 or whatever, you develop something on a more indie-ish level, maybe you really go back to the style of old school RPGs, right? Which is
totally he can make
his fame in the first place.
Sakaguchi started making if Mistwalker started making 16-bit like JRPG type games.
Yeah.
Honestly,
release that on Steam?
Nintendo Virtual Console, Steam, just like there's a lot of indie outlets even on consoles that you can get that stuff out for like $20 and a lot of people would buy it.
Yeah. I think they should do that. What do you guys think? We got a super chat here from Chase Talbot. Thank you so much for your support. Just want to thank you guys for all you do. Been listening to past podcasts and reviews while I'm at work, and it helps time go by. So thanks again. We appreciate that, Chase.
Yeah.
Glad that we could help the time pass a little quicker at work.
Yeah. As far as Terra Battle, I never played it. I never downloaded it.
Yeah.
But I know like Uematsu did some tracks on it, and he worked with a couple of the Final Fantasy guys, but I just don't. It's a phone game. Like Hironobu Sakaguchi doing a phone game. I thought that was already like, okay, the mighty have fallen kind of thing. But and he can't make that work. In some ways, I'm happy. It's like, okay, great. Maybe try making a linear story-oriented game now with good characters. Maybe let's do that again and see if that works for you.
Yeah, it's just funny because like. There have been people who have been sending me some of the music that was produced for Terra Battle 2 that Nobuo Uematsu made for it. Like the high level in terms of its production value in the music is freaking insane for something that now we just learned they're closing. So here's the other added kind of weird thing about this, right? Since it is a free-to-play game where they rely on microtransactions, I'm sure there's probably a gotcha system to some degree, but I'm sure that there are people who have spent money that have whatever their credit system is, right, in the game they have not used it yet. So I think that post that I was reading was saying something about basically the game is no longer on iTunes or the Play Store or anything like that, so you can't download it. It's officially gone. But they're going to continue supporting, encouraging people to spend whatever the credit system is, like spend that now, because the game will for sure end on September 3rd. It's just kind of a messy situation, and it's again, as Dude McGuy was saying, like it's a reason why I don't like the idea of games as a service.
Me too.
It's like, make a freaking game. If people want the game, they'll buy the game up front. Like, why can't you just do that?
There is no such thing as like a cult following, or like, what's the situation with like people like Picasso, or people who were great artists, but their art wasn't, seen at the level it is today. Like people find old stuff and bring it back up, and look at how cool this is. And that cannot happen with games as a service. It can never happen.
It's dead as soon as the service ends. It's over.
Yeah.
See, kind of the same, thing with MMOs, right? Like as soon as MMOs go offline, can't play that game anymore.
Yeah, it's gone, and no one will ever be able to experience that game again.
Don't like that. Anyways, so yeah, Hironobu Sakaguchi, I feel bad for you, man, but I would really like you to make games like you used to do.
Yeah.
Do that. I think you'll be successful. That's my advice to someone who doesn't need my advice.
Do what you used to do, please. Well, so someone here is saying, I can't, who was it? Humam is saying that he thought Terra Battle was just subsidizing while they make other games. Did they? I don't believe that Mistwalker is behind any other releases in the past 5 years.
Nope, this was their jam.
That was it. Which is very disappointing, very unfortunate. I don't know. You think
this was what
one of the legends, like think of Shigeru Miyamoto, I don't know. It's just like, it's unfortunate. But I know Hironobu Sakaguchi, he's like semi-retired, kind of. He does his live streams every now and then, and he's just having fun. He drinks a lot. he vacations a lot. He I don't know. He loves like the Pacific Islands and things. He doesn't seem as intense as maybe he once was. And in that case, it's like, maybe he's just not, maybe just doesn't care anymore that much. And I could see that.
Yeah. And I wouldn't necessarily blame him having had all the clout, all the amazing classics that he was a part of, and having to deal with the corporate world for as long as he did, and the way that kind of came to a crash. And it's like, he's made his money, his fortune. And it's like the fact that he's still making games, I don't know. There's part of me that thinks that at that point in life, I'd be like, I'm done. Like, I'm done with the stress. I'm done with the management side of things. I don't want to deal with that anymore. I'm just going to go live my life. But we would all love to see him return to make another freaking epic game, of course.
Do you think he still has it? Do you think he's still got it in him?
Passion is very important. And, with the research that I'm doing on the development of Chrono Cross and what I did on Chrono Trigger and a lot of these games before. I mean, these guys worked 7 days a week, freaking like 15, 16 hours a day for months and months and months and months, killing themselves to make those classic games we loved. It was not a pleasant experience. A lot of times they were left a little jaded afterwards. And
everything had to be perfect, but it shows.
Yeah. So in order to have the passion in you, to go through that and make another on top of like this huge pile of classics, I have to feel, especially in older age, that just isn't quite there anymore. And I would not blame him if that's the case. Yeah. So I can't blame him if he doesn't want to do it. But
it's like Peter Jackson directing The Hobbit, right? He didn't want to do it. They had other directors lined up. He had made Lord of the Rings. He was brilliant. Everyone loved him. He made some of the best movies ever. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, let's drag this guy back on to make the Hobbit films, and they weren't any good. And that's kind of like, that reflects his level of passion, and he's comfortable now, Peter Jackson is. He wasn't comfortable back then. He was working, 12, 15-hour days. And nowadays he's like, 8 hours, I'm done. It's just like, but he didn't want to direct anyways. He knows what kind of world that is. He knew that he couldn't make it as good as, a director that's still on the up and up, but that's just how it is. I see that possibility with Hironobu Sakaguchi as well. It's like, but he may still have the passion. I don't know. We should talk to him. We should ignite that passion back in his heart.
We gotta get Heon on here, and he has a tie. He has a tie to Mistwalker. Maybe he can get us an interview. Heon, if you're watching,
great. Just be all right, man.
An interview.
3 years. Take 3 years out of your half retirement, and just like go hard, man. And you can make it. You can do it. Especially if he does make, like, with the new thing Square-Enix is doing with Project Octopath, this new really cool, like, Unreal Engine but 16-bit type of look. Mm-hmm. He could crank a game like that out. Don't you think?
I believe in him. I believe in him. Yeah. I just I don't know if he has that much passion anymore. But let's get an interview where our primary question is: do you still have passion for games? Will you make another one, or are you just going to do this freaking mobile thing?
Yeah, are you just done? It's fine,
I'm just joking. We're not actually going to ask him that. Anyways, thought you guys might be interested to know Terra Battle 2 is shutting down. And if you have the game, and if you spent money on the game, make sure that you please get in there and, spend all your whatever the form of credits is for Terra Battle 2.
Or possibly get a refund if there's any possible way to do that.
Yeah. Okay.
The ship is sinking.
We're moving on now to our second topic. Square-Enix has created a division solely for development of Switch titles. Let me show you guys this.
I have two thoughts on this.
Okay. So I'm looking at Game Informer. That's where I'm getting this information from. Square-Enix is readying Octopath Traveler for launch as you read this, but that's not all it has up its sleeve for the Switch. According to Tomoya Asano, division executive at Square-Enix, more is on the way from the RPG juggernaut. During my conversation with the team, Asano mentioned that the team became its own division in April. So this means the Octopath Traveler team, which I believe the company is called Acquire or something like that. Anyways, it seems to me like what this is suggesting is that team has become its own division in Square-Enix.
Within Square-Enix, yeah.
Square-Enix has decided that the quote is, Square-Enix has decided that it wants to focus on original titles for the Switch. If Octopath Traveler does well, and this is something that appeals to fans, we want to focus on Switch. Please pick up the Switch if you want to play games like Octopath Traveler. There are several other titles we currently have, or that we're currently working on for Switch. When I asked Asano if games were already in development or if Square Enix's future on the platform is contingent upon Octopath Traveler's success, he clarified his statement by saying there are several other titles that we are currently working on for the Switch. If you could just wait a bit longer, we'll work with Nintendo and announce them in the future.
So this team is working on stuff for the Switch, but it doesn't sound like they're the only team working on Switch titles.
Yeah, if they have multiple titles,
Yeah, but that is all that this division will be doing, it seems.
Yeah. So, exciting news. I mean, I've seen other statements from Square execs in the past about how impressed they are by the Switch, how much they like the Switch, how they want to make more games for the Switch, how they want to port games to the Switch if they can. So this all falls in line with that, for sure. But it looks like maybe at E3 next week, we'll get a lot more news on exactly what or how many titles they have in production for it. But at least what it seems to me from that article, maybe I'm reading that wrong, but it seems like the team that developed Octopath Traveler has been made as a division in Square, kind of like Tokyo RPG Factory, that is dedicated to making games for the Switch. I can't speak for the brilliance of Octopath yet because I've not played the full game, but that demo that I played was unbelievably
really good demo.
And if those guys are going to keep making RPGs like that for the Switch, that's very, very exciting news.
Yeah.
Very, very exciting.
Yeah, that can't be understated. I have 3 other thoughts here, though. I had 2 thoughts. now I have three thoughts after hearing your thoughts. And the first one is that like this is a good thing, but it's possible that this maybe isn't as great as it sounds, because I don't want the Switch to be getting different games than the PS4, Xbox One. And that's kind of what happened when Nintendo and Square kind of had their little split. Square-Enix continued to, mostly because of Enix, right? But Square-Enix continued to develop for the Nintendo, except for in like the Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS. Nintendo got the Crystal Chronicles Final Fantasy instead of actual Final Fantasy, right? Nintendo got like some of the, I don't know, less flagship games, whereas Square and Sony and Microsoft got the really high end, the real first party IP. I have an issue with that, so I don't know. Of course, the Wii also. This was an issue all throughout the Wii's life, right? The Wii, people would make a game for the Wii, but it would be like the Wii version, or it would just be this company wanted to make money off of the Wii, so they made a Wii game, and it uses the nunchuck and whatever. But it wasn't the games that everyone else was getting. It wasn't the PS3 games. It wasn't any of that stuff. So I feel like that's a real concern. I don't know about you.
Well, I think that, I mean, yes, it really brings into question. It really brings into question whether any legit ports of upcoming like high-end games.
Yes. And that was my second point, was that this team might be like, hey, guys, because they couldn't port Dragon Quest 11, is it, right? Apparently,
it's been delayed, but it's still coming.
Port.
Yeah,
it's coming, but it's like a year down the line.
Yeah, it's way later.
Delayed.
Yeah,
and that makes me think, along with other things that I've heard, that it's easy to develop for the Switch, but it's hard to port to the Switch unless you started development later. For something that's been in development for a long time. And this may be a division that Square Enix is like, hey guys, get to know the Switch. You're going to be in charge of porting all of these games because it's harder than we thought, kind of thing, right? Yeah. That was my second thought. My third thought is this is freaking sweet. Project Octopath is going to kill it. And there's going to be a sequel to Project Octopath done in the style of Project Octopath. And it could possibly be a Final Fantasy VI remake. And that's just great. So who knows what the future holds. If they do a 6 remake, though, it's not just coming to the Switch. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. I'll say that the issue of porting in terms of getting games onto the Switch, this is a Nintendo problem more than anything else, and they seem to just be comfortable and okay with the idea that we're not going to get all of the high-profile third-party games on our console because we're more focused on something like this idea of portability or doing something different, right? So they seem to be totally okay with that. And they've accepted it, and I don't know if it's going to change anytime soon. The Switch is selling very well. So it's like, what can third-party software developers do? It's like, we can't port this game we're working on to the Switch, but we want to put something on the Switch.
Right.
It seems like creating a division specifically for making games that work on that platform is a smart decision. And to be honest, I'm more interested in what they're doing with Octopath Traveler than I am in a lot of their higher profile RPGs, like what they're doing with the mainline Final Fantasy series. Like, Octopath Traveler is speaking to me more than Final Fantasy 15 did. So, I don't know. Like, I really want to see Octopath Traveler succeed, especially if it's as good as it seems to be. It seems like development on that game is going very smoothly since they're literally just like getting into the very fine details to tweak before release rather than like having huge problems and just trying to get it out on time and all the problems they have with other things. And I think that's largely due to the scale of the project. I want to see more RPGs done in a sort of 16-bit style personally, because I think you can do so much more with the game when you do that than being limited by trying to optimize the engine and all the stuff that goes into, like big AAA titles.
I'm saying bring Sakaguchi back in and have him head up a 16-bit division at Square.
That'd be awesome. But overall, I think this is great. I think it also speaks to the confidence that Square has about Octopath Traveler. So Should be really, really good.
Yeah.
Okay, let's check out our next topic here. We're going to move over to our viewer suggested topics. This first one comes from Xylon73. It says, so I recently finished Radiant Historia. Thanks for the recommendation, Mike. I sent my full thoughts in a Discord PM if you're interested. I was reading it. I thought I responded to you. I must not have, and I apologize for that. And I've since moved on to replaying Golden Sun. One thing that has become very apparent by moving from one to the other is the quality of dialogue. This is somewhere I think Golden Sun really struggles, but I love the world and concept, and thankfully the dialogue in important scenes is still pretty good. So my question is, where would you put dialogue on a priority list if that included stuff like lore, exposition, design, characterizations, and whatever else you guys would add? First thing I want to say about this is I think that's a shame because I haven't played Golden Sun since we were teenagers.
Yeah, it's like 2002? 2001?
Really, really long time ago. And I recently made a list. I did a top 10 list of games that aren't Square-Enix. And I put Golden Sun on that list because I remembered loving it so much. This is why I struggle, because people keep asking me, "Are you going to update your top 30 video games of all time video
every year? You to do that every month?"
It's like do it. It's like I would love to. However, some of the games I put on the list I haven't played since I was a freaking little kid. And like Suikoden 1 and 2, for instance, I have not played in a long time. So I would talk about them, and I kind of did this with Golden Sun in the recent top 10 video I made. And there were several people who said Golden Sun's dialogue is garbage. It's horrible. And I was like, dude, I don't remember that being true. So it's something I need to revisit personally as well, and sort of like, I don't know, get new thoughts on it and analyze it as an older person. But to answer the question, dialogue in terms of priority is very, very, very high for me. I've recently done some discussion videos on Final Fantasy 13 and in Chrono Cross where I referenced Robert McKee, who's like a very well-known screenwriter, professor, teaches writing, and you know, he's kind of like the guru in Hollywood and in the industry when it comes to screenwriting, a very well-respected writer. And there's a quote that he has. I can't really pull it up, or I can't remember it off the top of my head, but he basically summarizes exactly dialogue, exactly what I want to say about it. Shoot. Why don't you give your thoughts on it real quick while I try and find this video, and then I'll play it so people can get the quote. Do you have any thoughts on dialogue?
Actually. Okay, so when you're designing a character, there's two ways that you kind of get to know the character. And the first way is by their background, their setting, kind of like what they do, where they came from. But the way your character interacts with other characters is probably the most important indicator at what kind of person you're dealing with. It's one thing to just tell people, oh, he's this kind of guy. This bad thing happened to him. It made him hardened. He's a war criminal or something. Or, okay, this other person is his best friend or whatever. There's like a love interest or something. And that's one thing. That's great, sure. But then to see them interact, that is where you really understand who they are. And that's how you understand like what kind of person you're dealing with. And, interactions is dialogue, 90% of it. I mean, you've got some physical interactions. You could have certain maybe gestures or people fight or things like that happens. But for the most part, it is dialogue. And you look at that, and that is how you know who your characters are. It's not just who they are, it's how they interact with other people. So dialogue is, unfortunately for Golden Sun, I guess, dialogue is like unbelievably important. And if your characters aren't participating in meaningful interactions or sensible interactions, then your characters aren't meaningful or sensible themselves. Like it's really difficult to have that with bad dialogue.
Yeah. I've pulled up basically my Chrono Cross discussion video where I played this, so I'm going to switch over to this real quick.
Okay.
Kason's not going to hear what Robert McKee is saying. This is the original video,
a lesson by Robert. Of what I just said.
A lesson by Robert McKee on 10 Traits of Faulty Dialogue, Part 1. This is the video I'm referencing in here. I just don't remember the time code where he actually says this. So I'm going to play my video, and I'll just repeat the quote to you, Kason, so that you know what he says. And he's speaking specifically. Let me get to the part where he's actually
characters
talking.
cannot talk in a complex.
Okay, here we go. And he's speaking specifically about dialogue, but I think it can be applied to other things. So let's just go ahead and hear what he has to say.
Because no matter how complex the psychology of your characters,
no matter how complex the psychology of your characters,
no matter how emotionally compelling, how deeply meaningful
no matter how emotionally compelling or how deeply meaningful your story design,
if your characters cannot talk in a manner that is true to their nature,
if the characters can't talk in a way that's true to their nature,
true to the conflicts they are living,
true to the conflicts they're living,
credible to the ear of the audience,
true and credible to the ear of the audience,
to the reader. In other words, if your dialogue sucks,
if your dialogue
all
sucks,
your wonderful storytelling,
all of your wonderful storytelling, all of your character complexity
will be buried under the
mulch of banal dialogue.
Dialogue is unconvincing.
When dialogue is unconvincing, characters are unconvincing.
And if the characters do not convince,
don't convince, the story does not convince
the reader or the audience.
And
they turn their back on your work.
I thought that was a really, really powerful quote, and I agree with it 100%. And that's why I keep talking about execution over ideas in a lot of these discussions, right? It's like, yeah, the ideas behind this are awesome. Like on paper, the concept is great. Like I think that's a really, really cool idea they're trying to implement. But like he says, if you're laughing at the dialogue or the characters rather than believing in what they're saying, people are going to turn their back on your ideas, and the ideas won't be effective with the audience. There are some people who are going to be able to forgive certain things, and this is not like an absolute rule, but there is a very large portion of the execution that is absolutely necessary for your audience to take what you're doing and what you're saying seriously. And I think that when it comes to dialogue, it is so important that people believe what's being said in order for them to believe in everything else that's going on around it.
No, I totally agree. You know, one of the unfortunate things when it comes to video games is that most of the gaming industry has been shaped by Japan. And so as good or as poetic or as interesting as writing may have been in Japan to Japanese people in the original language, when it made its way over here, I think video game fans, video gamers, kind of just had to deal with it, right? You've got this really cool game, but the dialogue kind of sucks. And that just is that's just how it went throughout the 90s, basically. And I think a lot of people, and this might be where Xylon's coming from as well, is it's like, I don't know, these games with bad dialogue are still really good games. So, like, what's the point? Like, why? But I think it's because we've gotten used to it. And maybe some like fans of anime, or specifically smaller anime that's fan translated, or like older anime, or certain things where it's like things just sort of seem a little bit off. A lot of times that can ruin your experience, but sometimes that's all you got. And if you like anime, then you gotta do something. Adult Swim only used to air, you end up getting used to it. And so it's comparatively, it's like, oh, relatively speaking, this game doesn't have that bad of dialogue, or relative to other games, this one stands out. But you compare it to a movie, storybook, play, anything else, and it's garbage, right? But for video games specifically, I just think that it's been bad for so long that people, and it's a meaningful part of people's childhoods, right?
Yeah,
you grew up playing this game. Like, it means something to you. If dialogue's that important and no one's believing this world, how come I believed it, right? How come it was so important to me? And I think that's a really important question to ask, but it's one unique to video games. It's one that is not often found in other places, and I think it's totally because of Japan's influence, and the language barrier just made it so that quality dialogue was not coming over for several decades, up until like the mid 2000s. So that's where I'd put it at.
Difficult. There's a whole other level, a whole other layer of difficulty in getting good dialogue when you're also translating it and localizing it on shoestring budgets in terms of the amount of money they put into localization, right?
Yeah.
There's an added layer on the dialogue in terms of the way it's going to come across when it's in a language that is so fundamentally different than English. And then on top of that, you have one guy trying to translate like 1 billion lines of dialogue in like the course of a month or two or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like the dialogue's gonna suffer.
And
on
he's
top
not
of that,
playing the game while translating. He has a piece of paper and another piece of paper, and he is or a digital, right, if he's on a computer.
Yeah, on
but
a computer.
He's not seeing the context. He's just going on the keyboard, right? Nowadays they actually provide context, but
yeah, it's tough. So it was definitely a big part of it. So yeah, I mean, on top of this, like video games, I think touching on what you were saying in terms of like they meant so much to us growing up. Like, not only was I think it easier to forgive dialogue for the reasons we just mentioned, and the fact that we were younger kids and you don't know good dialogue when you see it anyways.
Yeah.
But we were also looking at these like really, really basic little sprite characters and like, representation. Like visually, it wasn't all that impressive either necessarily. Like they got really good with the art, like moving into the later half of the Super Nintendo and stuff like that, and the sprite art became really, really excellent. But like back in the NES and like early Super Nintendo, like at that time, it's like we're trying to make out like what a tree looks like, and like
it's like 8 pixels tall.
This little tiny boat. I was watching the animation of the boat sailing in Final Fantasy 1, and the way it bobs up and down like really, really fast, and it's just like it was so simplistic in terms of what you're looking at that I think there's a certain part of you that isn't going to sit there and like, okay, hold up, this dialogue, like, nah, I can't believe this anymore, because I mean, all of it was like in a stage of infancy, the art and the programming and everything else. And so it's like, this is just cool that I can interact with the game, and like I tell it what to do and it goes there, and like that was so novel in and of itself that it was impressive. And since then, obviously, every other aspect has matured way, way far.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that there's a tendency, like you're saying, to forgive dialogue in video games over other mediums that stems back to, well, this story was awesome that I grew up with as a kid or whatever.
Yeah.
But like Xylon is saying here, there is a part of me that wants to re-examine Golden Sun, because there's several people who are saying the dialogue's awful in that game, and I just don't remember that. So I try to remember. I was probably like 13 when that game came out, or something like that.
It was like 2001 or something.
So I probably just didn't know what good dialogue was. That's probably just what I had no idea. I was probably
was it bad dialogue? Because you don't have to know what good dialogue is. If it impacted you, it was good for you, or just I should say good enough for you at that stage of your life, right?
Sure.
And so it's like, to decide whether or not something that doesn't have inherent value, it's art, it's subjective. And I don't know whether you knew, I don't know, because Lord of the Rings has good dialogue, right? But we didn't really, it was hard to distinguish back in 2001, like even being exposed to things with good dialogue. When things didn't have good dialogue, it just didn't matter. It just wasn't as important. Harvest Moon 64 doesn't have good dialogue.
Yeah, it probably doesn't.
It's a great game.
Eric Irving, who is also Velhart, says Golden Sun's issue is that their 15 minutes of dialogue in one scene could be reduced to 5 minutes.
Oh, so they're verbose.
Yeah, verbose, wordy,
That's
ostentatious, maybe. Yeah. So it's fatiguing to read.
True, and then Juarez is saying the text boxes were small, and we're talking Game Boy Advanced.
Oh yeah,
So
really small.
this is hard. It's hard to read that.
So, anyways, I am interested to go back and re-examine Golden Sun. I have it on the list. If the patrons would vote for it, then I could determine once and for all if the dialogue in Golden Sun is good or bad.
All right.
Okay. Anyways, good question, Xylon. Thanks for asking.
Yeah.
Let's move on to Daniel Burnham, who says, I've seen a lot of discussions about how video games can take inspiration from films or from film or books. Do you feel that there are storytelling techniques that can flow in the opposite direction? What inspiration do you take from video games when you write? Or what techniques from digital media do you wish were more prevalent in your favorite print media? This is a really hard question.
Smart question, dude. Honestly, when I'm taking inspiration from video games when I write, it's not in a positive, or it's in a I wish. Like, oh, if only people could control this character, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a hard. I don't know if my answer to this is a great answer. I contemplated not accepting this question because I didn't know if I had to say anything good about it. But the question is so good that I think it can inspire conversation. We could probably get some good ideas from people in the chat or people who comment on the video later. So I'm saying what I'm about to say with the caveat that I don't know how insightful or how good of a thing this is for me to say. It could be really stupid. Because I think these principles are true of writing regardless of whether or not you're trying to take inspiration from visual media into print media. Like, two things that come to mind is the idea of less is more, in terms of like the way that, Cormac McCarthy writes his books.
Oh, of course.
Which is extremely minimalist. Like, he tries to have almost no punctuation whatsoever. He writes very short sentences, and his dialogue is very concise, which is, I guess, the opposite problem of Golden Sun, right? But the idea is that you're not necessarily so concerned with like fully detailing with visually descriptive language, like everything. Like, a lot of authors get caught up in describing like exactly all the details of this bridge that they're crossing to get across the other side, and the social or the context of like the cultural context of that bridge being built, and like why it's important, and like all this crazy stuff, right? That you don't have in the movie version of that adaptation,
right?
Or
they just
whatever.
show it and that's it.
Movies in particular really have to get to the point in their pacing, and there's and a ton of stuff gets cut out because of the 2 to 2.5 hour limitation in terms of what they can do. So there is a certain pacing in films specifically. I don't know if this applies necessarily to games, but that I think can be carried over a little bit into getting rid of some of the superfluous content in novels and print media that people probably read and go like, okay, I get it. Can we freaking move on, please? And I think that Cormac McCarthy does that wonderfully, which is why his books, I think, have been adapted extremely well into films. No Country for Old Men and The Road specifically. I remember that I read The Road first because I knew the movie was coming out. And it was a very limited release film. It was like not like a big thing. But actor who plays Aragorn in
Viggo Mortensen?
Viggo Mortensen played the lead in that movie. In The Road.
I remember seeing trailers for it.
And I remember reading The Road, and there's a specific scene towards the end of the movie. They're kind of going into a town. And I saw it in my head, and I was thinking a lot about filmmaking at the time. We were talking about getting into making a YouTube channel and doing films, short films and stuff. And I remember thinking about how I would block that and what I would shoot, like what essentially the storyboard for that would be in my own head. And then I went and saw the movie, and it was literally the exact freaking same thing I saw in my head. It was crazy. It was a crazy experience. It was like, dude, that's exactly the shot I saw. And I think a big part of that was that he didn't describe it in detail. He kind of leaves it he's just giving you the basics and just the dialogue. Mostly it's just dialogue. There's not a lot of prose to speak of, especially in comparison to many other authors who like to get very wordy and describe everything like I said. So I think that's one thing that print media could probably do better, is stop being so in love with like your own descriptions of things and trust that the viewer can use their imagination and like see it in their mind and just like pace your story better. But I don't know. Less is more is kind of a common thing in writing anyways. It's not necessarily a film principle. So
it's so funny because you know how you go to college and you learn about how important college is.
Yeah.
And then you look at how Mark Zuckerberg didn't go to college and you're like, but Mark Zuckerberg. And then everyone else is like, yeah, do you have an IQ of 160? If not, sit down and learn math and such. And it's like, okay, fine, whatever. But you can always look at outliers, right? And I think with what you just said, unfortunately, there are outliers to that. People such as J.R.R. Tolkien. And every author loves Tolkien and wants to be Tolkien. However, Tolkien could do what he did because he had done 40 years of work building this world before he sat down and began describing with relentless detail every little thing, right? And including songs that most people skip over that's like get to the point, right? But yet his books have sold, 300 million copies. Like how does that work, right? But he's like the only one who could pull it off. And it took so many years and decades for him to actually be able to pull that off. And unless you're willing to put in 40 years, like trim the fat, don't do it at all, because for some reason Tolkien could do things that I'm sorry, you can't do it. You just can't, probably, just like Mark Zuckerberg. Yeah, some people don't have to graduate from college, but you maybe should. I don't know. It's kind of funny with that, but I don't really have much to say either. Yeah, I think what you said is actually really, really good, really sensible.
No, in the aim of remaining consistent, I will say that show don't tell is still very important. Like, you still have to set up your payoffs, you still have to give context, you still have to put the appropriate amount of subtext in order for your climatic moments to work later on. So this doesn't mean that you don't set up your world and that you don't. It just means that there's somewhere between Cormac McCarthy and J.R.R. Tolkien that I'm sure that you can find.
Well, that's J.K. Rowling, right?
Yeah, that you can find where you can pace yourself better, trim the fat, like you're saying. Don't be in love with your own descriptions. Don't give the audience way more than they need. Give them the exact right amount that they need. And then also don't not set up your story. Don't, not build your world for the sake of, pacing. But I don't know. It's a difficult question. There's not like a one rule for everyone kind of thing, right? Right. One shoe size doesn't fit all kind of an answer to this. Yeah. But I do think that people could take some inspiration from Cormac McCarthy and like just don't write so much, please. Like, just get to the point.
I'd agree with that.
Squareheart says that Stephen King falls into that middle sweet spot. I would agree for the most part from what I've read of Stephen King. I've not read all of Stephen King's stuff, but
see, when you write more suspenseful, scary type of stuff, as many of Stephen King's novels end up being, it's important to omit certain details, right? You don't want to describe everything. You don't want people to have an exact image in their mind because, in so many films, the boss, the enemy, right, or the monster is so much scarier before you see it than it is after you see it. That's like 99% of the time that's true. And that goes the same with books. If the book is going to describe a monster, every little detail, like give me some detail, but for the most part, it's like, oh, these people didn't have time to look at it because they had to get out of there so fast, right? They don't even really get exactly what it was they saw. Like, and I think that's kind of thing where with Stephen King, it's like you've got to be selective about what details you're putting out there.
Gliding Falcon asked real quick, I have not read A Song of Ice and Fire, but where does George R. R. Martin fall into this? I would say
I
that
think he's verbose.
yeah, from most people I've talked to, and from the novels in which I've read,
they're huge. They're thick.
like the one thing about him the one thing I took away, because I love the stories, and I think that his political intrigue is like friggin' bar none. It's like some of the best there is.
Yeah.
He does really, really good also with you're not expecting something to happen, and then it happens, and you're surprised, and you're like, how can I be surprised? Of course, all these characters, you know what I mean? But somehow he's really good at that. But the one thing that sticks in my mind the most of everything else from when I was reading those books was, holy crap, this chapter is like 50 pages. I don't have time to read this right now. His chapters,
and that's when you never read the book again.
His chapters are really, really long. And I said to myself when I was writing my book, which has ended up not being the case, that I was going to make really small, digestible chapters, but just have more chapters. So it's like, instead of writing a book with 15 chapters that are all freaking like 20 to 30, 40 pages or whatever, I'll write double that, but like cut the chapter lengths in half, so that when you sit down, it's like, oh, I can read 5 pages real quick, or 10 pages isn't bad. I can get through that. But I don't know. The high fantasy genre is not as easy to do that with as I first imagined. So my chapters are a little longer than the 5 or 10 pages that I was hoping for. But with George R.R. Martin specifically, he's just, oh, dude, like the chapters are so freaking long. And I do think that he could use with some trimming, especially in his descriptions of things. I think he does tend to draw them out longer than they need to be. I think it becomes especially true of books 4 and 5. The first 3 were really good. I was really into it. And then 4 and 5, I just felt like dragged real hard. And I lost interest, and I just was like, whatever, I'll watch the show first and then maybe come back to this later.
So with the first 3, it's like he pulls you in, and then you can't leave, you know? With the other books, it's like, you got to keep reading because you're invested in the story, but they're so long.
Yeah. Okay. So good question, Daniel. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
Let's move on to our next one, coming from Captain Awesome. Why has Hollywood nailed comic book movies and TV shows, and yet they have failed miserably at doing the same with video games? The fan bases overlap significantly, so there's a clear market value to it. What do they need to do to succeed, and is it even worth the effort? Could be worth the effort. I think it is.
When they do comic book films, they rarely actually follow any specific comic book. Sometimes you do have the villain of a comic book, and events sort of go, like with Dark Knight. You kind of have the Joker thing, but it's pretty different than what the Joker was in any comic you read. Same thing with Dark Knight Rises and Bane. Like, I guess technically, because Bane, spoiler alert to people, maybe I won't even give a spoiler. It's just the original comics with Bane and the ones that, what's his name? The guy who did Sin City. I can't remember his name. The artist.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Frank.
Don't remember. George Miller?
Yeah, something like that. That basically they ended differently from the way Dark Knight Rises chose to end Bane's character and Batman's character, right? And I know I'm giving the DC examples right now, but as far as like Marvel goes, they aren't exactly the way any single comic goes, right? And so when you look at the video game films, they also do that, right? But with a fundamental misunderstanding of who these characters are and what made them popular in the first place. So with the comic books, it's like you get the elements, you've got it, it's really concise. Like with what Mike was saying before, comics are pretty light, they're pretty easy to read, they're pretty quick, and there's not a ton of dialogue. These people aren't talking for forever, and it's easy to kind of get a picture of who these characters are. Whereas in a video game, so much of it is like, who are you? Because you're the one controlling it. And, oh no, the Prince of Persia would never have done that, what Jake Gyllenhaal did. But it's like, no, that's because you were the Prince of Persia in your game. And so, you know, your descriptions of character motivations are going to be a little bit different. But the comics, you get a good idea of who the characters are, and then you tell a story with them. And no one cares that it doesn't match any of the comic books, right? Nobody actually cares much about that. But when you have with video games, they don't get a good feeling for who these characters are for whatever reason, maybe that's part of what we should go into right now. They don't get a good feel on who these characters are, and then they also tell a story completely different from the video game, right? And that's a problem, right? Because it's enough. The comic book fans have decided it's enough to just get the character right and how they act, how they look, how they behave, what they do, and the plots and things. Okay, whatever. Like, do whatever they want. We're not going to be too picky about that. Whereas with video game people, it's like probably the same thing. I don't necessarily want a film remake of any video game, but I would at least like for the characters and their motivations and their personalities to be a little bit more in line with the game, and then they go do something great. But at the moment, they're missing both. They're not doing an adaptation of the game, and they're also not really getting the characters at all in the first place. They're trying to make the characters fit into already made Hollywood trope stereotypes, right? And video game characters just don't do that, because there's a little more of, in most cases, there's a little more of a human element, given the fact that you are controlling that person. There's a little bit, they need to be a little more relatable, because if you can't relate with the character on screen, that's one thing. But if you've played a game and you could relate with the character in the game because you were that character, and then you see him on the screen and it looks foreign to you, it's like, I don't know, you can't relate. You can't reconcile that.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge discrepancy between the two.
Yeah, I think that you made a really good point, and I'll try to dive into this here in a second, about how when you're playing a game, so much of your experience is, well, experiential. So much of your imprint, your unique like perception of that game comes through the experience that is unique to you, how you went about playing the game. And in older games, that really informed, I think, people's perception, unique personal perception of the characters they were playing. And that is impossible to please when you have so many people who have their own unique experience with it. I made a video on Monday talking about open worlds, and one of the comments that I got in on that video was somebody saying that with open worlds, like the reason that they like them so much is due to the fact that they kind of make their own story in a lot of ways. Like there's a unique personal sort of experience that comes with, I'm going to go this way right now, and when I do, I'm going to encounter these guys or this thing that happens or whatever they have, you know, that can randomly happen to you out in the wild with enemies that can appear and whatever. But it's like you kind of create your own little stories in your personal journey from point A to point B in whatever order you're doing it in or whatever. Right. That is totally unique to your own experience.
And comic books just don't do that. They just don't.
Yeah, they don't at all. So they're very, very different. And those little experiences that are personal, they mount up, they add up in the end to how a person feels towards the game. Now, I think that when we're talking about older games, this was more and more true. Not to say that it's not true still. I think that like Skyrim is a good example of a game that can do that. But games are becoming more and more cinematic, and they are the characters are more defined today. And they're not expecting you to literally pretend you are this person in this world and it's you are acting. I mean, there are obviously still some RPGs that do this, but more and more the industry is trending because they want to use voice acting and they want to, you know, so they're trending towards creating established characters, and it's becoming more and more clear who that character is. There's not a debate between me and some other person who think differently about who Link is, because
he
was Link when I played Ocarina of Time for the first time, and I projected myself onto that character, and somebody else did the same. And so if I'm making a movie like we had been talking about doing for The Legend of Zelda for a long time, and I decided to make a choice for the character, say we make him a deaf person, right, to sort of explain away his the fact he doesn't talk. That could be so hardcore against what this other person who played the games feels about that character. No, that's not right at all. That's terrible. You know, it's much easier to get it right for modern games that have really well established characters. They have a voice, they have mannerisms that are created by an actor that does voice and motion capture. There are all these details about the character that are clearly defined. And it's like, yes, that is unmistakable at this point. We know who the guy is, and there's no debating it. So I think games coming out more recently, say something like Uncharted, something like The Last of Us, something like Mass Effect, something like that. Mass Effect to a lesser degree, because there's a lot of choices you can make and you can kind of create the character, so to speak. But even still, these kinds of games, it's much easier, I think, to adapt than, say, Legend of Zelda, especially one of the older titles, or even an older Final Fantasy game, or older
or
RPGs,
Mario.
or something like that. Because it's just the unique experiences defined the characters more back then than they do today. On top of this, as you mentioned with comic books also have a visual element to them. Like they are essentially like storyboards. Really
exactly. That's what I was going to say. It's like they've storyboarded your film out for you. They never follow it, but still.
Yeah, so it's like you can block out a scene if you wanted to. Like you said, they don't do this as much. They still pretty much create a unique or new story with elements of the comics. But it's like, if you wanted to, like these stories are pretty much laid out visually as well as with the writing. And so it's like, I just feel like, especially in the case of some of those movies that have been made that are meant to look exactly like the comic, like Sin City, and 300 and stuff like that, you know, it's like they're also taking incredible inspiration from the stills from the graphic novels themselves, and it's like we want to recreate that shot.
Totally. A lot of the backlit, like they did this a lot with Batman vs Superman. Zack Snyder, who also did 300, by the way.
Yeah.
But they, get Batman standing in his pose and get that iconic shot with the lightning in the background when it's raining, and it's like all of a sudden, and then his bat signals going up in the clouds. That's straight up a frame from the comic book. And he decided, like, dude, we're going to steal it and we're going to put it in the movie. It's true.
I also thought about the fact that comic book movies were not done very well until basically Spider-Man, I want to say. They were really bad in the 90s and stuff like that, right? Like they just they sucked. But Spider-Man is one that sort of like took us to where we are now. I think that Batman Begins was another that made it take off. And then, while I hate to admit it, because I don't think Zack Snyder is a very good director, and I think that a lot of people would agree a lot of the comic book movies he's done are not great. But his work on what's the first one that was like the owl mask guy and like the guy with the Rorschach mask
dude, and the night something.
The freak is that movie called / graphic novel called? That was a good
The Watcher, right?
Watchmen.
That's it. Watchmen. Yeah.
Now people are going to start saying Watchmen like crazy. They're not going to realize for like 23 seconds we already freaking said it.
We got it.
So his work with Watchmen, 300, and moving forward, I think he also did Sin City, right?
Or he was involved, I think.
Partly involved with that?
I can't remember if he directed that. He did the zombie one, Day of the Dead or something.
Here they come. Look, all the Watchmen.
Watchmen, what up? Anyways. I can't actually remember that. But that's style. That's his style for sure.
His work on those films sort of like cemented this like visual fidelity. Fidelity is not the right word. When you're visual faithfulness to these comics, right? And so, anyways, I'm kind of rambling. I'll try to get to the point here. Essentially, I think comics are easier to adapt. One, because the stories are shorter. Two, because a lot of the visual work's been done for you. And I don't know. I guess I don't have a third one at this moment. Those two things are two of them. There are probably more.
You know what's funny? I like that you mentioned Spider-Man, though, because when you look at the three original Spider-Man, Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire films, right? Like, which one's the worst one?
The third one.
Yeah. And what everyone brings up is emo Peter Parker, right?
Yeah.
And going back to what I mentioned before about if you can stray from the story as long as you get the characters right. As long as Peter Parker in the comics is the same as Peter Parker in the films. And as far as I could tell, that was the case until the third film. All of a sudden, this is not the Peter Parker of the comic books. And this isn't how Venom went. And what like they now all of a sudden all of the other issues with the plot start to become more apparent because Peter Parker is now a different person than the comic books had suggested.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty important point.
I think you're onto something with that. And that actually ties into what we're talking about with video games too, because it's like, why were the Harry Potter films so well received, for instance, as an adaptation? I think it's because they captured the characters really, really well in the films.
Very well. Yeah.
As many changes as were made to the movies and things that people weren't happy with in the process of adapting to the shorter film length, I think that the movies still captured the essence of those characters to near perfection. And that's what matters most. And with comics, the characters are established really, really well. With a lot of video games, especially from our childhood, that is not the case. The main character was meant to be an avatar for the player to insert themselves in and project themselves onto. So it's a blank slate. So how do you then represent that character without upsetting people? Because everyone has a different perception of who that character is. And which is,
I guess the answer is to have a bunch of action time events and voice acting and cinematics, and you're not actually playing a game anymore. But it's like, okay, now that can be a movie.
Which is why Uncharted and modern games that are going for that really cinematic feel to them anyways are going to translate way better to movies than games we grew up with in the past.
Yep.
So
it's a sad truth.
I think that's it. I think that's the answer is it's harder to capture the characters from some of the most classic video games in a way that everyone's going to recognize and agree on and be happy with than it is to do that for comics and for books. So
you know what's funny? Somebody mentioned, Christian Lopez said, can this apply to Cloud in Advent Children? And given what I've heard you talk about specifically with how Cloud's character doesn't make sense, even when the studio themselves made that film, it's like they kind of didn't get the character right. And that kind of ruins the whole film in some ways. I think it's a good movie, by the way. I like Advent Children for what it's worth. But Cloud definitely is a different person than he was in the game.
And I think that there are still going to be two schools of thought on that. There are going to be some people who will think the character works in both in because they read the character a different way than I did.
And maybe they read it that way. That's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
But that's the whole point, is that I saw Cloud as a different dude than this guy did. So when this guy watched,
by the end of the game, he was a different person, right?
Yeah.
And then Advent Children's like, nope.
But like this guy is going to watch Advent Children and be like, oh yeah, that's Cloud. They'll recognize him immediately. But I'm like, this is not the same person that I thought.
That's part of the problem, I guess. Yeah.
So
it does apply to Cloud, Christian.
I believe you nailed it on the head with that. Like that is, I think, the reason why video games are so hard to adapt in a way that, on top of the fact that I think that a lot of directors who were taking on these projects didn't play the game or grow up with games and don't necessarily understand games. But that shouldn't be a problem anymore. We're at the point now where directors today hitting their prime should have also grown up playing these games too.
However, as Dude McGuy points out, this also applies to Luke in The Last Jedi. And that's
true.
Crazy. That's crazy true. Because I don't know, like somehow that wasn't the character that we thought we were going to see on screen in The Last Jedi.
Yeah,
there's a lot to be said about that. I think, and a lot of people were upset. That's all I'm going to say about that.
As Rob says, they got the character of the materia wrong. Summons are red.
Oh,
you can't make summons a different color.
Come on, guys, you know that's how it works.
Anyways, that's a great question, Captain Awesome. Thank you for asking. If you guys have any more thoughts on that, let us know in the chat and in the comments. We'll check on it later. Okay. Last question for the day comes from Daniel Imperial. He asks, do you ever find that non-story elements, such as game difficulty, affect your enjoyment of stories in games? An example of this could be a boss fight in a game against a prominent villain in the story being too easy. I personally have found that gameplay can very much change how immersed I am in a story.
It's
do you have any immediate thoughts on that?
I did. Initially, my thoughts were just, yeah, like that is true. I don't think it's as big of a deal though. Like when I go in and I beat a boss, my immediate thought, and it's easy, right? Super easy. My immediate thought is, crap, I level grinded too much. I'm way too powerful. And I usually put it onto myself, right? Like, oh, the game must not have wanted me to have been that powerful. That's an assumption on my part. Now, I think what Daniel was talking about is when, no, the game did want it to be that easy. And does that affect your gameplay, or does that affect your experience? And typically I go in just for the story. Whether the boss is really hard or not, it affects it a little bit. Let me explain what I mean by that. So Harry Potter 7.2, first off, if no one knows the ending of Harry Potter, if no one watched the ending of the films, mute it for a minute. You probably know. Okay, so Voldemort dies the wimpiest, most worthless, like gradual, strange death of any villain that I have ever seen. It was incredibly unsatisfying, right? And he just basically like slowly disintegrates into like paper and floats off into the wind. You wanted him to get nuked, right? You wanted like a bomb to go off. It's like, boom, somebody hits him with a spell and he just like, he's gone, like just like that. And instead what you got was like, and he just like slowly died for the course of like 2 minutes. And you're like, is that it? Is he dead yet? Is he gone? Is he really gone? And that can equate to having an easy boss in a video game, right? The boss was too easy, and it does kind of affect it a little. It's like, oh, you built this guy up, like if for Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII, oh, you built this guy up for so long, and I just killed him in like 3 hits. That can affect it a little bit, but I don't think it affects it that much because the story is so much more than just the final encounter of the plot, right? And obviously that would be where the climax is. You want it to be powerful, but I find joy in the journey. I'm not so much I don't even like to beat games half the time. I just like to play them. I love to play them. I'm all about the rising action. That's where your character development happens. That's where all of the, that's where the suspense gets built up. Everything happens in the rising action. And I love the setting of, just to throw that out there, I love the first 2/3 of basically any story, right? But when we get towards the end there, it's just not something that I put as much value on. So if the boss is easy or hard, I'll either make assumptions about myself, or I may be a little disappointed, but it doesn't affect things that much.
Yeah. The one example that I can think of, and it doesn't necessarily affect my enjoyment of the game, because I like the Uncharted games a lot. I think they're really fun to play. I think that like visually they're just insane. Like
they're really good.
The action sequences they put together, especially in 3 and 2, 3, and 4. But in 2 there was the whole train going off the side of the cliff sequence, and he's climbing the train while it's falling off a cliff. It was just like so sick.
It's like Legolas jumping up the falling building in The Hobbit 3.
Don't like that, and I didn't even necessarily like what they did with Legolas in the original trilogy either. But
right.
The airplane sequence where he's like diving out of an airplane and like all the cargo's falling out, and he's like fighting a guy in the air like while they're falling out of a plane, like trying to get to a freaking like parachute so he could save his life.
That's like James Bond stuff.
And then in 4, the chase on the motorcycle, the camera angle is right in front of this motorcycle, and you're basically on the Drake's brother, Nathan's brother, I should say, is driving the motorcycle, so you're not controlling the motorcycle. You're trying to shoot behind you at this thing that's chasing you. But if you just watch the sequence, it's just like mind-blowing. The action is unbelievable, right? So that's what the games are really doing. They're really trying to create this just like incredible spectacle with their action sequences and this like heavy action. But one thing that never really connected with me with the story was that, these are explorers. They are kind of like, they're people who solve puzzles and they go treasure hunting and treasure seeking and that sort of thing, right? But like the number of people you kill, and not even just bad guys. I mean, like even in the sequence in Uncharted 4 where you're driving and you're trying to get away, but you're just like pounding through like all of these like shops and
in Brazil, right? Like the cheap houses.
You're like completely wrecking the economy of this village.
Yes, and many people's lives. Yeah, absolutely.
And you're just like driving through just like the amount of damage done construction wise. And I know that you're not supposed to think about that. This is like B-movie action type stuff. It's just supposed to be fun. Like I get it. I do get it. But there is a disconnect for me with the game's story and the characters and what that's about versus what you're doing when you're playing the game. When you're watching the story, you're following these good people. I mean, like, there's gray areas in terms of their morality or whatever.
Right.
But, good-hearted people who are trying to solve puzzles and, like, they're treasure hunting, treasure seeking. But when you're playing the game, you're not doing that so much. There's not, like, a super strong puzzle-solving element to the game. It's more about killing lots and lots and lots of dudes in huge waves. They're just coming out and you're just freaking like blasting people with, hundreds of people you're shooting and killing, right?
Yeah.
So there's an element to that game where the story and the gameplay don't quite connect for me. They don't coincide completely. And so that has to some extent lessened my enjoyment of the games. I still love them. I still play them. I still like them a lot. But it's not like, I'm not like super stoked. It's not like one of my favorite series because of that. And in comparison to that, you have The Last of Us, which is a similar kind of game. And you do a lot of killing, but it's totally justified in the story. The story and the gameplay really do come together and they make sense together. So, I guess that's more or less what my answer would be to that, but I can't think of many other examples where, I mean, I guess you're right in saying, I'm speaking to Daniel Imperial, in saying that, this happens in a lot of RPGs if you are over-leveled or if you do. I guess it happened in Final Fantasy 15 for me, right? Because I knew ahead of time they're going to take me out of the open world. And they're going to kind of put me into a linear section at the end. There was an interview that happened before the game came out. And so I was kind of afraid to progress forward with the story, feeling like, well, I'm not going to be able to come back. They do give you away, but the feeling was generally, I want to try and complete as much here as I can before I jump into that linear section at the
That's
end.
part of why I don't beat games. Like, I want to do everything before I beat it, and I never end up doing everything, so I just never end up beating it.
Right. So it's like, let's just take care of as much of this as I can.
Yeah.
But by doing that, I want to say 10, 15, maybe 20 levels over-leveled for the final section.
Yeah, you get over-leveled. Yeah.
And I fought the final boss, and it was like, that was real easy. And so it does lessen sort of like the sense of danger from the final encounter. It makes it less climatic or anticlimactic even. So I think that can have an effect if it's like, this guy is supposed to be the most powerful dude on the planet. And then you fight him and it's like, no, I'm definitely the most powerful dude on the planet. He's not even close to me.
Yep.
So, yeah.
But it comes at the very end, and it's like the story is so much more than its ending. A great ending is always appreciated. But, the story has mostly run its course by the time that ending happens. And if the ending's not satisfying, that sucks, but I don't know. The ride was still there. The journey still happened.
Yeah, dude. And literally in Final Fantasy 15, you drove a car. That was the journey.
It's true, the journey. Yeah, I'm not talking about finding joy in that journey. That's a little different.
Finding joy in the car ride.
Finding joy in the 10-minute car ride across the island.
Yep. Anyways, good question, Daniel. If anyone else has ideas on that, please let us know.
Please do.
In the comments or in the chat. But that is it for our podcast for this week.
We're done. That was the final question.
Thank you so much for watching and listening, supporting us. We will have another video for you on Monday, and probably a stream on Friday. I had to cancel last week; something came up, but this week I'm pretty sure I will be able to do it. So look forward to that. More Final Fantasy Friday, another video on Monday.
Yep.
Thanks everybody, and we'll see you again next week. Peace out.
Peace.